Welcome everybody. Today we are here to learn about how to create, present, and use webinars, specifically as a potential replacement for those trade shows that have been canceled, or even for your field sales team if they're prevented from doing in-person sales calls. If you've never done a webinar, it can be a scary prospect. I've heard companies that I've worked with have said, well, what if our speaker embarrasses our company? Or what if nobody shows up? Those are valid concerns, but once we go through this webinar about webinars today, I think you'll have a better understanding about some basic steps and the details you need to go through. And webinars are like any other event. There's lots and lots of details, and they should be treated that way. And as long as you pay attention to the detail, then you will have a successful webinar. I'll be your speaker today. My name is Bruce McDuffie. I am the founder and president of MMG. I'm an engineer with 25 plus years of sales and marketing experience. And I have produced and created hundreds of webinars over the past 10 years. You might say I was doing webinars before webinars were cool. This webinar is created and presented by Manufacturing Marketing Group, that's MMG. And what we do is help industrial companies looking to add growth to their top line with strategic and digital marketing tactics, as well as sales CRM. So here's an example of a webinar, probably my most successful webinar that I ever created. It was a company up in Massachusetts, and they made digital meters, industrial digital meters that took readouts from like huge tank levels or flows and things like that. And when I started working with these guys, they were doing webinars on their own, and they were promoting their product. And they would get 10 or 20 people to attend those product webinars, and they wanted to do better. So I asked them, what's a common question you get at your help desk? And they said, well, we get a lot of questions about 4 to 20 milliamp current loops. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. It's a way you can connect the meters to the actual sensors. And they said, but that's really simple. Everybody knows about that. I said, well, if you're getting questions at the help desk, there's a need, there's a pain point out there that we can address. So we put out an invitation, created the webinar. We had 634 people sign up for that live webinar, which is, by the way, a very strong result for an industrial niche like that. But even more importantly, I checked yesterday, there's been 134,000 YouTube views of that webinar recording. And that's a power we'll talk about, is a power of webinars, not only the live event like this one, but the recorded content you can use and leverage. Also speaking today with me is Cassidy. She'll be working on the chat questions and chat window. Welcome, Cassidy.
Hey, everybody.
So why are we here today? Well, we want to talk about webinars, how to create a webinar, how to produce it, how to broadcast it. But we'll drill down a little bit more also is, if you have a trade show that you were relying on this year for revenue stream and leads and deal pipeline, probably been canceled. So we're going to talk about a webinar as a replacement for a trade show. And I know a webinar virtual event will never replace the face-to-face, no more handshaking, but I was going to say handshaking at the booth. It's not going to replace that, but this is a way to keep your brand and your offering in front of your target market. That's what webinars do. We'll also talk about how, if your sales team is out there, field salespeople, and they're out there, they used to be out there visiting companies and doing their thing, maybe that's not an option anymore. So we'll talk about how you can use a webinar to help a salesperson continue to engage with their territory or their audience. And then we'll also talk about how you can make your webinar interesting and engaging and not boring, like most of them are. Okay, I've got a poll I want to share with the audience. Let's get an idea of your experience with webinars. So if you can choose what your level of experience is with webinars, and maybe you do them on a regular basis, maybe you've tried it a couple of times in the past without any repeating. Maybe you've never tried a webinar, and or someplace in the middle in between all those. Give it a few minutes for folks to chime in here. Okay, I think that's probably everybody. I will go ahead and close the poll. Last chance, closing the poll. And we'll take a look at the results. So 80% have never tried a webinar. Well, you're in the right place. Everybody's in the right place. Nobody regular webinar presenters. And again, webinars can be daunting. So hopefully this webinar about webinars will help you feel more comfortable about it. I do want to clarify webinars versus meetings. And they are actually different. What I'm talking about today is what I call a webinar. And typically it's one-to-many. And maybe, for example, if you had a speaker at one of your trade shows who's going to present a topic to a group of 100 people, that would be something you could do virtually as a webinar. Typically, there's limited interaction. You don't want to have two-way audio communications. It's a one-way presentation. And usually with webinars, you have more presenting options like the poll that I just did or the question chat feature and so on. Whereas a meeting is usually a smaller group, and it usually is a two-way audio conversation. And we've all been in meetings, we've all seen the funny memes where there's a dog barking or somebody's phone rings and all these distractions on a meeting because the audio channels are open both ways. And that you would never do that on a webinar. It's just too problematic. And typically with meetings, there's less presenting options. Software that supports webinars. I'm doing this webinar on GoToWebinar. Other options are WebEx, Zoom. We've all heard of Zoom, and that can go either way. That can be a webinar tool or a meeting tool. If you add more features to it, it can be a webinar tool. GoToMeeting is an example of meeting software. It's just for really small groups usually, and then of course Skype. We've all had familiar with Skype, which is a meeting tool. So they are different. And today I'm talking about webinars where you're doing a virtual presentation of one-to-many. Now, webinars, they can be used for many things. They can be used for education, which is my favorite topic. They can be used for training, either internal or external training. They can be used for internal company presentations where there's one-to-many. For example, in this day and age with the virus and the shutdowns and the shelter in place, maybe the CEO wants to have a presentation to his team or her team. Perfect for that. How-to webinars are great for how-to if you really want to narrow down on how to do something, whether it's how to use your product or how to leverage the product for some goal. And they can be used for product launches. I do want to point out here, and I'll probably say this a couple of times in the webinar, that educational webinars where you're sharing some knowledge or expertise you have to address a pain point in your target audience, those by far are the best topics. Product webinars, product launches, you're going to get maybe 10% of the interest that you get from education. And I've seen that over and over as I've done webinars over the past 10 years. Value of webinars, TOMA. TOMA is top of mind awareness. When you can present yourself or your company as an expert and help solve a problem that your audience has, that gives you TOMA, top of mind awareness. Because when somebody watches the webinar, they're probably not ready to buy your product or service at that point, but you want them to remember you. So if you can really help them with a product, who are they going to call first when their time comes up and they need to buy the product? They're going to call the company that helped them solve their problem. That's what TOMA is. It gives you credibility because you're proving your expertise. It demonstrates your expertise, like you really know what you're talking about here. So you're a step above other companies that compete, gives you qualified leads. Webinars can generate hundreds of qualified leads. And you have a high value piece of content. The live broadcast is just the beginning. You always make sure you record it and then you leverage it. You put it on your website, you share it on YouTube, maybe you have another video channel. It's a nice high value piece of content. Not only the recording, but also you can reuse that content. You can repurpose the content. You could take your webinar and create a white paper, or create an infographic, or create a podcast, sorry, a podcast or whatever. You can repurpose it because you've done the hard work of creating and aggregating the content for your topic. So in the chat, folks, and this is another way to engage with your audience, in the question chat window, if just type in there what you're hoping to do with your webinar. Is it are you hoping to do education? And if you're not to the point where you're hoping to do something, just at this point, what do you think sounds like a good idea for a webinar for your particular company? Just type it in the questions pane. So if you coming in, we've got stay in contact with customers and reps. Yep, it's great for that. Remember to give them something they can use during your webinar. Promote yourselves as experts in the field. Absolutely, webinars are great for that. And surprisingly, there's not a lot of folks who are good at webinars. Pain points, yep. Lead gen, yep. Expertise to clients, so you're a resource. All those things are great ideas. And some of the more general ones like lead gen, you want to think about which type of webinar is best. Is education going to give you good leads, or is a product demo going to give you good leads? And I'm not saying don't do product demos and product launches with a webinar. I'm just saying they don't get as much interest as education. So good, thanks everyone for sharing those ideas. So let's talk about how to replace your trade shows or in-person visits by your sales team or your reps. And I've got 2 slides here that show quick steps, and then we're going to leverage that into the how to do a webinar. Sure, your company might be spending tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars on trade shows, and you don't spend that kind of money if it's not going to generate revenue. So now if all of a sudden those trade shows are gone, or they're either canceled or they're postponed, that could be a major hit to revenue. So you've got to do something in place of those. And I'm suggesting consider webinars in place of those. Here's 7 steps of how you can replace a trade show. Number 1, you get a list of the registrants, and most of these trade show promoters are willing to give you a list of registrants. Got to get their email because this is virtual, this is digital. Make sure you understand the audience and their common pain point where you can help. So really know the audience. And then you want to share educational content. And in this case, because you're replacing a trade show, you got to offer value. So it probably promoting a product or a service promotion or a service is not going to be as effective to replace that trade show presence. Create a webinar around that pain point. Invite your registrants to the webinar. And it's perfect if you had a trade show planned and you had an expert speaker from your company signed up to give a presentation or a class. Just take that person and put them on a webinar. Get them to transfer their material to a webinar, and you're done. Most of the work is done there. So that's a nice option. And then ask the trade show promoter if they'll help you promote your webinar. They sort of owe you because they've postponed or canceled their trade show. So they sort of owe you something. So I think you're in a pretty good position to ask them to help out with your webinar in one way or another. Here's an example of how you can do this. There's a show every April, typically every April, called Interfex. And Interfex is the major show in the US that is everything related to pharmaceutical or drug production, transportation, production, manufacture, compliance, all those things. All those vendors come to Interfix. And so say your company has a system they manufacture that is for environmental monitoring and compliance with FDA. So show is canceled. And by the way, usually Interfix is in Jacob Javits Center in New York. So we know that's not happening next month. So this is actually kind of a true scenario, except I'm not with this company. So you look into your audience and you say, okay, people, when they come to this show and they visit us, they're interested in complying, FDA compliance for their environmental monitoring system. So pain point is compliance. They don't want to get letters and they don't want to get rejected. They don't want to get product deemed as no good. So they want environmental monitoring that complies with the FDA. So your topic could be, how do you comply with FDA regulations for continuous or environmental monitoring of drug storage? Something specific like that. That's your topic. You're an expert on it because that's what you do. That's your business. Put together a webinar, invite the people from Interfix. Granted, not everybody from Interfix, the registrants, are going to be interested in that, but a large chunk will. And then do your webinar. Gets you in front of the audience, provides or positions you as an expert and shares your expertise. And then when the day does come around later this year and they need a new system or they need help with their compliance, you're going to get the call. How about in-person sales calls? How can you replace that with webinars? The way this works is obviously you need to get the sales team involved and on board and understanding what's happening. And once again, you want to focus on solving a problem that's common to your audience. And webinar topics could be the same: educational events, how to use the product or service, tips and tricks for whatever FDA compliance, new product launch, or special offers on like evaluations and demos. And the way to do this is you take I'm going to use the example of a field direct salesperson. Say this direct salesperson is based in Boston and they cover the entire Northeast. And they have their database, they have their customers, they have their prospects. And what that person could do is create a webinar. The salesperson could be the speaker, the expert. So to further reinforce that relationship that he has or she has and wants. And have them do a webinar, invite the territory, have them be the expert. And salespeople need some pretty strong guidance because if they're trying to educate the audience, they always get nervous and they fall back on their pitch and they forget about the education. So just be aware of that. So you want to keep that salesperson's presence top of mind with the audience, and you want to keep the brand top of mind. So if you can't visit anybody, if you have 7 salespeople out there in the field, do 7 webinars, they could all be the same content, so you can scale it pretty easy too. And you might even consider a weekly or a bi-weekly training class. I had a company that sold a service. It was an IT services company, and they resold a service for security, and they would do a training class every other week. And it was a huge success, and it drove business like crazy for those guys. Okay, let's talk about setup and presentation. Let's talk about nuts and bolts for your webinar. First item is topic. You got to pick a topic that the audience cares about. And again, education always does better than product promotion. So your topic has to be relevant to the audience, has to be meaningful. You want to give them something they can use to make their lives a little better. If you look at it that way, then you're going to be audience focused and not company or product or self-focused. This is about the audience, not about you or your product or your company. And you want to showcase your expertise, your being your company's expertise. Here's a little diagram I use to help identify what I call a sweet spot topic. It's just the overlap of the pain or problem or even aspiration that's common to your target audience and how it's related to your company's expertise. Next, you want to make sure, this is important, you want to make sure you connect your company and your offering to the material, but don't make your presentation about your company, because the last thing you want is somebody to have a need to buy your product or service in a couple of months or a few months, and you don't want them thinking, geez, it was a great webinar, they really helped me out, but I don't remember who gave me the webinar. I don't remember the company that did the webinar. Don't want that to happen. So you got to make sure you connect your company to the education. And again, it's kind of subtle. You know, it's not about, you don't want to talk too much about your company, but you want to connect it and make sure they know who's talking. So use your brand, use your colors, use your logo. Like you can see on this slide, I've got my website in the bottom banner, and I've got my logo in the lower left or lower right, and it's on every slide. And that's a way to use your brand to make sure people remember who gave this material. You want to be consistent on all your communications, from your email invitation to the post-webinar emails. You want to establish your company as the go-to expert, your company and your people as the go-to expert, which is not the same as telling people you're an expert. You demonstrate you're an expert. Make sure you have a call to action. We're doing these webinars because we want, ultimately, we do want new clients, or we do want new customers, or we do want to sell our product. Everybody knows that. That's a given. We're not doing these because we've got nothing else to do. So make sure that you have a call to action. And remember WIFM, W-I-I-F-M. Your audience is always going to ask, what's in it for me? And you have to answer their question. When you guys looked at this webinar and you looked at the description and the invitation, you asked yourselves, what's in it for me? And you may have had, and you answered it, and I'm trying to answer that question here during the webinar too. You're gonna need a team, and you need a committed team. I had a webinar once that I did, and I asked a subject matter expert, I said, hey, John, got a webinar coming up in a couple of months. Are you willing to be an expert? He said, yes, put me down. I said, okay, it's on this date at this time. He said, good, I'm in. And I was pretty excited because he was a good expert. 2 weeks after people were signed up and we had the slides made, and 2 weeks before the webinar live date, he tells me, oh, Bruce, I can't do it because I got to go see a client, customer. And I was livid, but I blamed myself because I didn't make it clear to him how committed they have to be. And I always tell my folks on the team, I'd say there's only two things that are going to get you out of doing this webinar after you commit to it. One is if someone in your immediate family dies. The other one is if you die. That really makes the point. And you want to make sure they commit, and there's no wiggling out of it. No customer visits, no. The CEO calls someone and says, I got to meet with you at the same time as the webinar. You tell the CEO, no, I already made a commitment. I can't do it. We'll do it another time. That's how important it is. You should have a webinar manager or a project manager. You want to have a subject matter expert who's a decent speaker and who's willing to commit some time. You should have a moderator, someone who manages the technology, the platform, and keeps things running on time. A promotion manager. Promotion is very important for a webinar, so you should have somebody who's in charge of getting people to sign up. And then you should have a technology expert involved too, somebody who understands the webinar platform and understands how it integrates with your other technology stack. Your digital technology, this is a virtual event. You're going to have technology that drives the event. And if you are going to do a webinar, don't use a free service like Hangouts, or there's other free services out there. Don't try to use a free service because you're going to have problems. It's going to break down in the middle of the webinar, or you're not going to know how to use it, or it's just not going to cut it. So pay for a platform. Reliable platforms like GoToWebinar, that's what I use for my webinars. WebEx is a good one. On24 is a good one. Zoom, as long as you pay for the extra features for webinars, can work, but don't try to take shortcuts on that. You should use your marketing automation for your lead management. Marketing automation, like I use HubSpot. And you can use Marketo, Eloqua, any of the marketing automation tools usually integrate with webinar platforms. Use your CRM. You want to manage, if it's a lead gen, you want to manage the leads for your sales team. It's too easy for the sales team to ignore it, especially if it's a lot of leads. I've given out 200 leads to salespeople, and they just won't even do anything with it because they claim they don't have the time. So at least you want to know that. And by using your CRM, you can track if leads are being followed up on. So your CRM, your customer relationship management tool, plus your MAP, your marketing automation platform, you can measure your ROI. If you're going to put a lot of time and then some money into a webinar, you'd like to know if it generated any business, and digital technology can track that for you. And there's a lot of work for webinars. This is just a list of things that you have to do to be ready to even approach presenting a webinar. Set up your platform. That's the back-end setup. You got to create a landing page for registration. You got to create a form for registration and then the form processing steps. You should have a confirmation page so people know that they're registered. You should have, you got to set up your email invitations so you can get people to remind them about the webinar. Email confirmation with the login info, your email reminders, and then your post-webinar emails. So that's a lot of content to create. And that's why we recommend really starting at least 3 months ahead of when you want your live broadcast date to be. Promotion, again, the key to a successful webinar is to get your useful, helpful message in front of your target audience. And so you got to know your target audience, and you got to have a channel to get your message in front of them. Internal database is your best bet because you can just send an email to your database. Organic, social media paid ads, paid banner ads in, for example, trade association websites and venues, and maybe some paid ads like Google ads or Bing ads. But you got to promote it, and it's important to have that promotion plan in place. And as I mentioned with trade shows, you're in a good position to ask the promoter to help you promote your webinar that's going to be in place of the trade show, because you have some leverage there. But it's all about getting in front of your target audience, your target market, with a relevant message, and then letting them know that you're doing it. This one's probably the most important, and that is practice. I say practice, rehearse, and practice, because it's very important. Many times, especially with subject matter experts, they can be the worst because they know they're experts and they think, well, yeah, I'll do a webinar. I'll just talk about it. I'll just talk about my expertise. And that if you have somebody not willing to do the practice sessions, I would suggest you think about it twice on using them at all, because it's never going to be an effective webinar. So don't let them improvise. If somebody says, yep, I'll be your SME for your webinar, say, okay, I need you to commit to 3 practice sessions, and of course, help us create slides for you. If they already have a slide deck, that can probably be edited and used. That's important. 3 practice sessions, you have a table read, and like this one here with the Seinfeld cast. And then you have a practice where you just kind of plow through it and comment on different sections and kind of tweak it. And then you have a final dress rehearsal, like it's the live thing. Every time, really, this is really important. Make sure you use your technology for your practice sessions that you'll be using in the live event. So that means everybody use the same computer they're going to use for the event, same microphone, the same everything. So you can test the technology and make sure it's going to work as well. If somebody practices on a computer they're not going to use or a microphone they're not going to use, and then the day of the live event, chances are higher that there could be a problem because they haven't tested it. And all of your live players should be present for the practice sessions. That means your subject matter expert, your moderator, your questions moderator, and anybody who has a part in the live event should be in all the practices. So practice, very important. Very important to practice. And it has to be more than just one kind of get together general meeting before the webinar. It'll make a huge difference in your webinar, guaranteed. Okay, let's see if there's any questions out there. And I usually have two. This is not the end of the webinar, by the way. I like to have 2 Q&A sessions. I don't like to just keep the questions all till the end. So if you have a question, go ahead and type it in the question pane, and let's see what we get. Cassidy, do we have some questions?
Yep, we have a question from Melanie, and she's wondering, do you read from a script?
You do not read a script because people can typically tell that you're reading a script. And generally, I think that generally turns people off. If you do have it's not to say you shouldn't start with a script. A script would be a good way to start, but then the practice sessions help it become more natural. The way I like to do slides is I like to, in the notes, I put in some bullets, some points that I want to cover, and then I talk about them. And you have to be aware, like sometimes I do tend to go on about things, but that's how I like to do it because it sounds more natural. So script, great for starting out, but not for actually reading it during a live broadcast. Any other questions, Cassidy?
Yep, we got another question from Sam, and they are wondering, how many people can I expect to attend my webinar?
Depends on the topic, of course. You're going to get more people to attend for a educational topic that resonates than you are with a product promotion or product demonstration. If it's a good educational topic that resonates with the audience, you could expect to get 1 to 2% of your database to sign up. Typically, you're going to have like a number of people register, and then a certain percent of those are going to show up for the live event, usually between 30 and 50%. We better keep moving here, Cassidy. We do have another Q&A session at the end, so you can type those questions in at any time, and we'll cover them up at the end. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. So start thinking of your questions for the last Q&A session. And again, type them in anytime in the question pane. You don't have to wait for the actual section. So big day has arrived, and you've done your practice sessions, you've got a great topic, and you're ready to do the live event. And you know, frankly, most of us here on the call today have attended webinars in the past. I mean, webinars are all over the place. I attend them all the time. And frankly, I'd say about 20 to 25% are what I would call good webinars. And the reason that they're not good is because the biggest reason is the webinar presenter doesn't focus on the audience. The webinar presenter focuses on their company and their product. And that's, again, you got to connect it, but don't make the webinar about that, especially if it's educational. The other thing you see is they don't practice. They don't use the engagement tools like the polls and the chat and things like that. And so they just tend to be kind of flat. So here's some tips on how you can make your webinar be a standout, great webinar. The big day is here. You're going to have to do some things in advance to make sure everything's smooth. I like to use 2 voices on a webinar. Today we've got myself and Cassidy. Sometimes having 2 subject matter experts alternate slides. I've done that too. That can be very effective. It's just a little more interesting than one person going on and on, sort of like I've been doing today. So if you can get 2 people, do it. Make sure you set up 30 minutes early. Most people say 30 minutes, geez, I just got to show up 10 minutes early. No, show up 30 minutes early because things could happen. Your technology could be down, your internal network could be down, your subject matter expert gets caught in traffic, and tons of things can happen. So if you say everybody be in place at your place for the webinar by 30 minutes early, it gives you a good buffer. Have a day of the webinar checklist, and even though I've done hundreds of webinars and I've done them over 10 years, I still every webinar, I print out my event day checklist. And it's things like get yourself a cup of water, use the bathroom before you start. Make sure you check your communications and your quality. And this one's really important. Make sure you turn off all your noisemakers before you start the event. There's nothing more annoying than having a phone ring in the background for the presenter and when he's in a webinar. Start and end on time. Keep track of time like I'm doing right now. I'm a little behind where I want to be, but I know exactly where I am as far as the time of the webinar. You can have a backup plan for your technology. I've been in webinars where I had one I did once and lost power to the whole building. And you can't do much about losing power, but you could, I didn't do this, but I could have set up a backup where like I had I had the webinar playing through my phone. I could have done something like that, but I didn't. So right now I have another instance of this webinar on my other computer. So if something happened to my computer, for some reason it went down, I could just jump over and pick it up on that one with a different internet connection. So be aware that there's a lot of details. I love checklists. I was in the Navy for 3 years and we had checklists for everything. So it kind of got in my blood. Checklists are great for organizing. You want to engage with the audience. I'm doing a lot of speaking here today, but I did a poll at the beginning. You can do quizzes to your audience. You can do surveys. Use the chat like I did a couple of times where I asked you to type something in the chat about what you think. Tell stories. Video or no video. This is kind of a matter of opinion and preference. And I'll show you what it looks like. This is what it would look like if I was sharing my video the entire time. So some people like it, but other people are like, well, okay, I see what you look like, Bruce. That's good. I always like to put a face with a voice. That's good. I'm good. Don't need to see me talk the entire time. So some people use them, some don't. I like to just show it and then say, okay, now we're going back to voice, but it is an option. Sometimes if you have a panel, maybe you're doing a webinar with, you have 4 subject matter experts on a panel, that might make sense with the video to see who's talking, but it's an option. You would have to decide. So I am going to stop sharing my webcam right now. Okay. Never, ever open two-way audio on a webinar. And I remember early on in my webinar career, I would try this. I'd say, okay, we're going to have Q&A, going to open up the microphones for Q&A. It's a disaster because it never fails that when you open up somebody's channel microphone, you get the feedback or you get an echo, or they don't have their end set up right, so they think they're talking, but they're not. It's just way too problematic, so don't do it. And you want to have your Q&A. Like I said, I like to have a Q&A at the beginning and a Q&A at the middle and a Q&A at the end. So you can engage with your audience in many ways other than audio or voice. Let's try it right now. So in the questions panel, just type in the questions chat, video, if you like video, video yes, or you don't like video, video no. So video yes if you like it, video no if you don't. Okay, a few folks are, yeah, Melanie says video, meh. That's a good way to put it, I know. It's like, yeah, I can take it or leave it. Nick says no, Ken says no. Yeah, that's how I feel too. I don't think it adds a lot other than just maybe showing it. Or you could also, Nick also said you could use a headshot. But yeah, headshots are good. But you can decide when you do your webinar, you can decide the best way to do it. Okay. So let's circle back a little bit to people might be asking, well, what about my company? What about my product? How does that fit in? And I said this earlier, I want to say it again because it's important. You want to make sure that whoever's watching the webinar remembers who gave them the webinar. And you do this a couple of different ways. One is, as I showed you, use your branding. When you do your invitations, you make sure people know who it's from. When you do your post-webinar emails, you give them some more content and things. So you have multiple interactions. Like when you guys signed up for this webinar, there was multiple interactions. There was the invitation, there was the confirmation, there was the landing page, there was the registration, there was the email confirmation. All these things work to connecting my company with the fact that how to do a webinar. So chances are you'll remember when your day does come and maybe you need help putting on a webinar, maybe you'll call us. But don't lead with your company. And like I said, with salespeople, if you get salespeople doing webinars, you got to be really strong with them, that they don't fall back on their pitch mode, because they almost always do. So make sure they stay on education mode, and that make sure they know that if they're educating and they're showing their expertise and their credibility, that's how it helps them, not so much an order tomorrow. So that's the difference. Now, if you caveat here, yeah, if your webinar is about your product or about your service, then you can be a little bit more heavier on your company, but don't get up there and say, our company's the global leader in blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares. They're there at the webinar for some reason that you answered the question, or they answered the question, what's in it for me? So keep that focus on the audience as much as you can, and you'll have a much more successful webinar. A few more tips. Know your audience. That's true for any marketing, any sales. You got to know your audience. Know your audience first, and then figure out how your product or service or expertise fits with that audience. That's key. Don't wing it. Don't wait until the end for Q&A. Like I mentioned, have a couple of Q&A sessions, because it kind of breaks up the presentation and it gives people a chance to remember their questions. Have a strong call to action, because you want people to do something else after the webinar. And give them something they can use. Give them, if you can focus on this, give your audience something they can use that makes their life a little easier or a little better. That's how you focus. And again, educational webinars always do better than product promotions, every time. Like the company I mentioned at the beginning, Digital Meters, pretty boring product. And their product webinars, they get 10 or 20 people. First educational webinar, they get 634 people. That's the difference, and that's pretty much the ratio. That's a big ratio, but it's going to be at least 10 times. Okay, we got some time, a few minutes left for questions. And by the way, before we don't leave yet, because there's a checklist. If you look in the download or the handout section of your webinar control panel there's a checklist there, and it's a nice Excel spreadsheet that can be modified for your own use, but it gives you a nice timeline, and those are pretty much all the steps that you need to take to have a successful webinar. And there's a lot of them. I think there's 65 steps in this checklist, so it's very comprehensive. Feel free to download that. So do we have any questions out there, Cassidy?
Yeah, we have a couple questions. One question is from Nathaniel, and he's wondering, what is the best way to get leads from a webinar?
Yeah, leads should be addressed before you even start crafting your webinar. And so first thing you need to do is define what is a lead. And once you've defined that, then you can decide who the leads are from the webinar. Are the leads everybody who registered? Are the leads everybody who attended? Or are the leads something else? So you need to define leads and then craft your webinar around how to convert those people into a list you can give your sales team. Actually, I think we're out of time, Cassidy, so let's just leave it at that question. And finally, my call to action. If you want, I've got a webinar resources package, and it's got the checklist, it's got an 8-step guide, it's got the sweet spot topic template, and it's got the day of the event checklist. If you want me to email this to you, I'd be happy to do that. It's all in one zip file. Just type in the chat pane, send me the package or send me the kit. That's all you have to do. And then I'll know who requested it and I'll send you the kit. It's pretty helpful, especially like 80% of the folks on this webinar have never done a webinar. So you need some guidance, and this checklist and these resources help you to be successful. Webinar services, we do offer webinar services. And Cassidy will type in the URL. Oh, you already did it. So it's in the chat, webinar services, check that out. We have 2 levels of services. One is just a consulting where we guide you. And the other one is a full-blown, we do it all for you. If you're interested in talking about those, happy to do it. We're happy to get you started and set up. And then MMG, we're a HubSpot partner. We do marketing and strategy and tactics, and we do sales process and CRM for industrial companies. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much for spending time with us today. I hope you found this useful. I hope I got TOMA. Everyone remember what TOMA means? And call me if I can help. I'm here to help.